today and see Chief Marshall again. Nice to see you, and look forward to chatting with everybody else on the call. What I did yesterday that I thought was helpful, and I'm going to do it again, and I will try to be short and sweet so we save time to just have a conversation. But excuse me, but I think it's important to, pardon me, it's important to understand who DSC, who we are, what our orientation is, what our scope of work is, to kind of understand our philosophy and who we serve and how we serve people. Then a bit about kind of how we arrived at the Red Lion, not so much from the county state of emergency order perspective, but from an operational shelter provider perspective. And then give an overview of what the services actually look like at the Red Lion, and then what you can expect from us as a neighbor at any of our properties, particularly the one we are currently occupying in Renton. So I'll start big picture and work all the way down to the ground in Renton. So DSC has been around. This is our 41st year providing services to people who are experiencing homelessness. The majority of that work has happened in the city of Seattle. We do work countywide, but we're highly concentrated in the city of Seattle. Our original origination as a program came from observations in the late 70s, 1979, of people who seemed to have the highest needs were the ones that weren't making it into shelters that were available in our community. For whatever reason, the shelters that did exist, and most of which we're talking downtown Seattle, had barriers to access to service that, for any number of reasons, kept people who had significant behavioral health issues out. So I'm talking serious mental health issues, substance use issues, physical disabilities, and in many cases, all three. They were not able to access the services that were in place. And so our organization started by trying to answer the question, how do we design services that draw that group of people into care? And that started with a shelter that, up until we moved to the Renton in early April, had been open every night for 14,500 plus nights, providing shelter on the second floor of 3rd and James in Seattle, which is something we were very proud of. That service or orientation grew from being a shelter operator to building housing for people, to becoming an outpatient behavioral health care provider, to doing crisis services and crisis diversion services. And I won't belabor what all those services are, other than saying a couple things. And I'm happy to answer more questions if that's something people want to know later. But we're probably most known for at this point our permanent supportive housing model, which we've done a lot of work to really spearhead and advocate for and really try to develop. So we're constantly developing new housing programs. I know that has been one of the questions of what do we do finally for people who are staying at the Red Line? And the answer, I'll be the first to tell you, the answer is we provide permanent housing for them. We're building that as fast as we possibly can. I see my colleague Ron is on the call here. Ron is tasked with getting to oversee some of the day-to-day of some of those programs. And yeah, Ron might tell you we're building them too fast than we can possibly keep up with, but it's because we have a crisis and we need to build as fast as we possibly can, because we have an absolute dearth of the housing that we need for people like the people who are living at the Red Lion. So that is permanent supportive housing. That is housing where people get a lease, they have their own apartment. It's not a hotel, it's an apartment building. And then we provide the services on site to people on a voluntary basis. We also do, like I said, outpatient behavioral health care and crisis diversion services. The point that is important to take away from that is all of those are designed to be intentionally low barrier. So going back to the original comment of identifying people who are existing services haven't worked for, people for whom they've fallen through the cracks of whatever services we do have in our community, figuring out how to design things for them has always been what we're trying to do. So all of our services are housing first and harm reduction, meaning we find the lowest possible barriers to access to services or to care. And then once people are in services, it's our job to try to do whatever it takes to keep them engaged, to keep them housed, meaning we work with people wherever they may be at in their recovery, including people who are still actively dealing with substance use, people who are enmeshed in significant mental health care issues and may struggle with insight to how severe their issues are. Those are the people DSC wants to serve. That model's grown ever since 1979 to where we are now. We have 18 housing and shelter programs. We have 4 outpatient behavioral health care programs, and we have a crisis diversion facility, one of which is the program I've alluded to that does outreach in South King County. So that before we started doing work at the Red Lion, that was probably our one real kind of foray into doing work down in the south part of the county. And that's the mobile crisis team that I can talk about a little bit later based out of the Red Lion. So that's where we were before COVID. Very large social service agency targeting the highest needs people in Seattle. When it came to shelter, we had 508 shelter beds across 5 different programs. One of them was the biggest and the oldest shelter program. And as COVID hit, we quickly realized we have a real extra crisis on our hands. Not only are the people that we're trying to serve, almost all of them, one way or another, fall into the high risk category for people who will suffer complications from COVID in that they're over 60, they have underlying health conditions. But layer on top of that, that the folks that are in shelter are living in super congregate settings. I've been quoting Dow Constantine, who has been saying ever since, the cheek to jowl sleeping arrangements, which is very on point way of describing what our dorms look like in some of our shelter programs, where people are literally sleeping that far apart in bunk beds. And the idea had always been homelessness is a crisis. There's thousands of people outside. We got to do whatever we can to get as many people inside as we possibly can. Frankly, in honesty and hindsight, I think we've brought in too many people all at once in such a small space, and we've learned some lessons from that in the way we design shelter moving forward. But we had a situation where we had a dynamic where if somebody tested positive for COVID, our ability to limit that from spreading to everybody else in the facility or many other people was almost non-existent. So we quickly worked with county and city partners to decongest those shelter settings, where Ron basically stood up a shelter for 150 people overnight. Well, I'll be fair, 3 nights over a weekend. We set up a shelter, a building we'd never been in before, to decongest that shelter, which made big difference. That we did that for about a month, and then we realized, okay, that's better. Everybody's sleeping 6 feet apart now. That's way better than cheek to jowl, but everyone's still sharing a bathroom, still a big open room. And a month had gone by in the pandemic, and we realized that's not enough. We need to find a way to get people out of congregate settings as best as we possibly can. And that's where the Red Lion came on board. We've been having conversations about trying to find a space somewhere where we could give people private rooms. We looked at a few different options. We'd found some motels where we were renting individual rooms for people, but there was nothing quite like the facility that, like the Red Lion, that it came before us. And so when it did, we jumped at the chance to move and felt an enormous sense of urgency to move, and did. Over a span of about 3 days, moved 230 people from downtown Seattle to the Renton Red Lion. I would point out too, just that there's often been, maybe this is me pontificating a bit, so I'll try to do that quickly. There's always been this sense of how do we solve homelessness? Well, we were able to empty out that shelter in 45 minutes when we said, here, you people get an individual space with your own door and your own shower. It turned out it was that easy to get people to move out of a homeless shelter, which I thought was amazing. Anyway, that notwithstanding. So we're at the Red Lion, and I would say the whole premise of that move was around limiting and avoiding the spread of COVID. We have been able to test through a pre-existing partnership with the Seattle Flu Study, which has been doing flu study work in all sorts of congregate settings in our community for years, like university dorms, daycare centers, the airport, homeless shelters. They pivoted to start doing work for COVID, once COVID hit. And they've been doing testing multiple times a week at the Red Lion this entire time. And we've done over 350 tests and 0 positives, which I know correlation is not causation, but I cannot say the same for some of our other remaining congregate programs. Despite our move to the Red Line, we weren't able to get everybody out of congregate settings. Some remain, and we have had outbreaks. We currently have an outbreak at one of our programs in Seattle with about 15 positive cases. And, you know, it's not clear to say it's because that's a congregate setting, but I can say because it is a congregate setting, it's been very hard to get a handle on it. So I truly think this move has, at minimum, dramatically reduced the spread of COVID and most likely saved several lives along the way of a high-risk group of people. So about what you can expect in the program itself, and this is the last piece, and I'll land the plane and then be quiet. So often people think of a homeless shelter. I know I did. I got my start as a volunteer in our shelter 17 years ago and had no idea what to expect. And I just assumed mats on the floor and a hot cup of soup. And I was very wrong. There is definitely survival services of a place to sleep and a place to get off the street, but it is so much more than that. And that it is heavily staffed and really service rich. The services are entirely voluntary, because that goes back to this housing first model, where the whole premise is it's on the staff to design services that people want to participate in, but people aren't required. So if somebody doesn't meet with a case manager, we don't bar them from the shelter. That's not who we are as service providers. I can also tell you, even if we were, that's the least effective way to do our work. We've watched it fail before. But despite that it's voluntary, we have tons of services on site that people by and large engage with. So night shift, we don't drop below about 5 people working. Day shift, there are about 10 to 15 people working in the program. That's 24/7. We are staffed all the time. Those are staff that are trained in crisis de-escalation, trauma-informed care, trained in a resource, for example, that is this nurse line resource that we can use to try to avoid non-necessary 911 calls, any number of different things. That's the floor staff, if you will, the shelter counselor staff. In addition to that staff, there's a case management team that's had to do a lot of different work in the time of COVID, but fundamentally their job is to work with everybody. They get a caseload, they're assigned a caseload of people staying in the shelter, and it's their job to figure out and work with somebody to resolve their homelessness, basically to find people housing. Unfortunately, we are, in terms of the housing we develop, about 6,500 units short in our community. When you factor in just low-income housing, we're about 45,000 units short. So that's a very hard job. They also help, so because there's so little housing, they also help people get connected to behavioral health care, to go to doctor's appointments, get on social security benefits, reconnect with family, all the other things that might help resolve somebody's homelessness. So that's available to everybody in the program. In addition to on-site medical care, we have an embedded partnership with Harborview Medical Center with a doctor and nurses on-site based in the program. They have an office. A former hotel room is now an office. And then on their first floor is the mobile crisis team program that I referenced earlier, which is a program that based by its contract can only be deployed by fire, police, and ER social work. I wish it could be deployed by local business or by us. We can't call them ourselves. I think some of the conversations recently around how we respond to crisis in our community, maybe there might be opportunity to change that and have it be loosened up a bit. But that's based on the first floor to be a resource for all of Renton, always has been, but now it's located in Renton, which I know, talking with the police department, has been useful. So I am meaning to brag. I'm actually proud of the services that we provide in the shelter. And I know sometimes it can seem, when people are dealing with mental health issues, the question is, can we just offer them more services? And I think it's an example of, it's a service-rich environment, but there's no real replacing having a home base for people to receive that care in. And we're seeing that effect of that difference from people living in a congregate setting to living in a closed door environment where they've got their own space. People are able to receive and access care in a way they just weren't 3-4 months ago, which was not the intent of the move, but we're seeing some amazing positive side benefits to it. And last point is around being a neighbor. So undeniably, 235 people who did not live in Renton live there now that didn't live there in early April. I've been a little put out by some of the coverage in the media around how 235 people from Pioneer Square have moved to Renton. I would be quick to point out, I think that those folks are not from Pioneer Square. They're not from Seattle. They're from the overall region. Homelessness, as we know, is a regional problem, and they come from all over. Often, many times, our local hospitals and local first responders from across the county. But that all said, they weren't in Renton before this. So I fully recognize that, and I recognize there's going to be an impact, and I know we'll want to talk about that on this call. What you can get as a commitment, a firm commitment from DSC, is that we pride ourselves on being a good neighbor, and that when there are events or issues, we will be responsive. These meetings are just one slight example of that we want to have this dialogue with our neighbors. That good neighbor expectation extends to our clients too. People are expected to uphold a good neighbor agreement as a condition of staying in the program. And if they don't, they're asked to leave. And I can talk about what that process looks like. That good neighbor agreement captures some of the over-the-top events that have caught some attention in our community. The really horrible event at Wajimaya that is just totally beyond the pale, unacceptable sort of events, most certainly caused that person to lose their ability to stay in the program. But so do far less significant events like just consistent panhandling in the neighborhood, being disrespectful to local neighbors and business owners is the type of thing that can cause people to have their services withdrawn. And in full transparency, that's not the first step we deploy with people. We try to find a way to solve whatever the underlying issue is, because it doesn't benefit anybody for us to just say, well, you can't be here now. Good luck. That's just not who we are, and we also don't find that to be very effective. But that is the sort of thing that we expect our clients to follow, and we find that we typically have some good success with that. And I will stop because I have a tendency to just go on and on and on, but wanted to give you that kind of lay of the land and be quiet and field questions.
Noah, thank you very much, and thank you for the detailed explanation. And on a personal human level, thank you for the work that you do. I'm sure at times it can be incredibly thankless and challenging, and it is overwhelming that there is a need for the services that you provide. There's I can't imagine that anyone would question that need, and thank you for the same. Like you said, it is probably some concerns about the impact on the neighborhood or the community, which brings a lot of people forward in question. Is there anybody that has questions that you would like to bring up to begin with? I do have some that are pending, but if anybody else would like to speak.
I've got one that's just really simple, but no, it sounds like you have dropped the E from DESC.
No, it might be my bizarrely fast way of speaking. No, we are DESC. We aren't, Diana and I were joking about it. We actually, it used to stand, it does still technically stand, well, technically it doesn't stand for anything anymore, but we originally were the Downtown Emergency Service Center. But even before we came to Renton, we're not just downtown, and we do way more than just emergency services. So we felt like we needed to go with the acronym. Yeah. So no, it's DESC.
I was going to call you out on that, and you know, the one thing that I will point out, and I mean, without getting into too much with the Red Lion, fire deals with these issues every day in Renton, and whether it's 235 or whether it's 35 or whether it's 3.5, we do deal with this, and that's where I think these partnerships really come into play. And I think we've had this pushed in our region, and it's having some really negative impacts on our community. But in the long game of this, we need to work together, and not just say not in my backyard. And to your point as well, no, is like these people yet reside in Seattle, but is it fair to say, because they don't all come from Seattle, is it fair to say that we just shove them into Seattle, or do we find ways to deal with this regionally and work collaboratively so that we are able to deal with the impacts? Because I mean, Diana will be the first one to say with the chamber, and I've seen it as a chamber member, board member. It's like there are significant impacts to our businesses in Renton that are, dare I say, catastrophic, but they're significant. And so we've seen this dip, and what we have to do is figure out how we come out of the dip and figure out the normal, right? That's what I see, and that's what we're hoping more than anything else, is that we'll recognize that DESC, King County are working genuinely and truly collaboratively with the city of Renton, with the Chamber of Commerce, with the businesses, with the communities that are impacted by this, to mitigate the impacts of this, because there's no question that we have in our community. It's throughout. It's a regional problem. It's escalating, but we have to. And I think in the conversation that we had, Noah, last Friday, it's like I'm absolutely convinced, Noah, talking to the mayor, talking to the chamber, talking to the city council, Renton is not trying to say not in my backyard. Renton is saying we want to be a great partner. But partnership means a voice, and that's where I think the county, primarily DESC, is falling a tad bit short, is in really truly allowing a legitimate voice at a table for the community of Renton, for the businesses in Renton, and for the electeds in Renton to have a voice. So anyway, just like you, I'm going to shut up.
I have a quick question. You talked about how if people don't adhere to the rules within the program, that they're no longer allowed to participate. So I'm just curious, do you place them somewhere else, or where do they end up at that point?
Yeah, so well, that's a great question. Yeah, so I was corrected by my colleague Sam, who I don't think is on the call this time, but I see Ron and Dan who we worked that out early because, you know, I have to say, we've never up and moved our shelter program to Renton overnight in a pandemic either. So we were trying to figure some of this stuff out on the fly, and we wanted to resolve the issue of if we did have to withdraw somebody, our term we borrow somebody is the term we use. We didn't want them to just then be stuck in Renton with nowhere to go, no shelter, and then potentially burdening the chief's team or the police's team, or, you know, having to seek out shelter where they don't know where to find it. So we worked out a plan by which we're trying to get anyone that we have to withdraw services to back to Seattle. And Sam told me yesterday on the call, well, one, I'd add in, because of this dynamic, we have seen the number of people we've had to bar from services just totally nosedive. It's been very, very few people, which I think speaks to the kind of dynamic of the program. But for those that we have, we've been able to get them a new shelter bed in Seattle without exception, which I didn't think we'd be able to do that for everybody, but Sam was able to tell me we were able to do that for absolute everybody. I think there are a few people who weren't able to do it the first day, but within a day or two, everybody has been able to get reconnected to a shelter back in the city of Seattle. So not only are they sheltered, they're not, you know, in a new city without connection to resource. That's our goal. If that happens, I can't promise we'll be able to be successful with everybody, but so far we're doing okay on that.
Noah, can you hear me?
Oh, go ahead. You go ahead.
Yep, we can hear you.
Noah, I'm going to be your harshest critic. And that shouldn't come as any surprise, as we're your nearest neighbor to the east. And I speak on behalf of the Renton Village companies, which includes the Evergreen Building and the Renton Village Shopping Center and the Renton Village Cinema. I can't even begin to quantify to you the impacts that we have encountered from the location of this facility here. I'm going to agree with you on one thing, that high-risk homeless people have the absolute right to safe and clean housing and the services that you provide. But the problem is, none of that translates to the high-risk individuals that walk outside your gate on a daily basis, 24 hours a day. We have been dealing with such an enormous impact regarding trespass, loitering, sleeping in front of our office building and our storefronts and our retail centers in clear daylight on a regular basis. I witness individuals urinating and defecating on our properties. We've got theft at our shops, and we've got break-ins. And I understand that as it relates to break-ins, some of these people may not be residents of your shelter. But my biggest criticism of your organization is that your good neighbor policy literally stops the moment an individual leaves the fence, and there's absolutely zero control that you folks put on people leaving the facility. We can't call 911 every time there's an angry, high-risk individual yelling and screaming in our parking lot or in front of the store or with our employees. It's beyond, I can't quantify the impacts that we've had. We're losing tenants in our office building. We're losing tenants in our retail center. And it isn't due to the fact that there's just an occasional individual that happens to be trespassing on our property. It's frequent and it's daily. I've been the director of operations at Renton Village for 30 years now. And there isn't anyone more qualified in the city of Renton than myself to be able to convey to you how serious these impacts really are. And my suggestion to DESC in King County is that you figure out some way to mitigate the impacts that this facility is having on the surrounding business. Right now, you're doing nothing to mitigate those impacts. I mean, you're spending a lot of time talking about good neighbor policy, and that simply does not translate to a high-risk individual who walks outside your gate. You have no control over that. And I want to further say that at no time since this facility was originated has anyone from King County or DESC contacted our property management staff or our ownership or anyone having to do with the daily operation of our facilities as to how we deal with the impacts of the Red Lion Hotel. And I find that unacceptable, period. So I invite your comments on how you might want to mitigate some of these impacts that you're having to the adjoining businesses and communities. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for flagging those concerns. I mean, a handful of things come to mind. I would say one, just in a big picture, you know, when we move into a new location, our community engagement process typically starts sometimes years before we actually move in. And so, but that is not what we were afforded this time because of our response to the pandemic. So we are definitely playing catch up and building the relationships with our neighbors. And I thank Diane and all of you all, because that's the point of these meetings. And I don't envision them being a one-off. I envision them being a chance to continue to have these conversations. Admittedly, they're starting later than I think I would have liked. And I think I'm happy to take the blame for that. I think it's been a lot of going on. I mean, I know there have been some formats established to set up conversations across different departments and stakeholders that I think Diane and I are on regularly, and I don't find them necessarily conducive to this sort of conversation. So, you know, I think we're late in the game on that. I would say a couple things though, maybe to push back a bit on some of the examples. I mean, we're very sensitive to and responsive to concerns about the impacts of people staying in our programs when they are breaking the law or being bad neighbors in the community. And so I don't like pushing back on concerns around that by saying it's not always clear how much those are in fact people related to the Red Line. I'm sure there are cases where they are. When I hear stories about people sleeping in doorways and defecating on property, I have a hard time really connecting the dots to people who have their own bed and their own bathroom 100 yards away being necessarily a high percentage of, if it could be, that just...
defecating on our property and then immediately walking into the secured area of your facility. I've seen it time and time again.
Okay, well, that is definitely would be something we would consider a violation of that good neighbor policy. And so to your comment around you can't call 911 every time you see something like that, I agree. You can call us 24/7 if you see something like that, and I can guarantee you we will respond to that person in the moment.
You never contact information for anyone at your facility.
I will give it to this group right now. I believe we have, but I will definitely make sure that information is available to absolutely anybody who needs it. And I think from memory, Ron and Dan, you might need to correct me. I'm pretty sure we're 206-587-2460. Is that the correct number off the top of my head? You guys know.
And Noah, just for my confirmation, did you say 206-587-2460?
Yeah, Ron and Dan are both on the call. I want to make sure we get that number right. We had to change our number more than once to make sure it was working, as we had to tease apart Red Line phone number with DSC phone number. It was a harder tech fix than you might guess. So I want to make sure I get that exactly right from memory. And I don't have my phone here. So I'll defer to Ron and Dan. If you could look that up while we're chatting, that'd be really helpful.
And is that a 24/7 DESC contact if there's any kind of question or challenge?
That's the front desk of the program where we have that's where I reference having 5 to 12 people working 24/7. There are people there who are available to respond. That's why staff are there, is able to respond to client need 24 hours a day. That's the whole point of having staff on site like that.
Okay. And before I hit publish, I'll get confirmation from those guys that the number is correct, but then I'll put it in the chat for everybody.
Yeah, can people hear me now?
Yes. Yeah, Dan.
Okay, yeah. So the number for the Red Lion, I had to adjust my phone because it was muting and unmuting and muting and unmuting. So, 06 584 2854. And
Close.
just to introduce myself, I'm the operations manager, one of 3 managers at the Red Lion Hotel. And to capitalize on what Noah is saying is that our good neighbor agreement most definitely extends. It's in our hotel shelter guest expectations that clients receive when they come in. That if any business is called and report that people have been stealing, Noah already spoke to this once, if they're panhandling in the neighborhood, there's a list of about 6 or 7 different things that we will consider that a violation of the agreement, and I think to speak to the larger context, if people are loitering and laying in front of doorways, that's something that we would most definitely want to know about right away. So then when the person is coming in at the gate, we can have the guard stop the person at the gate, and the appropriate staff will meet with that client, get the story on it, and then handle that accordingly. I think largely you guys didn't have that information due to what Noah was saying is that our response was due to a pandemic is the reason why things kind of went so quickly. And so the DESC's position is to never not include anyone in the process, but due to the circumstances, I think that now we're doubling back, and now we're seeing that, okay, there are some issues, and let's work together to respond, to help respond and improve the experience for everybody involved. But as soon as we know that right away.
You're breaking up a tad at the end, Dan, but I think your point was clear that. So yeah, I mean, we'll respond to. I mean, I was just down there the other day talking to somebody, and I watched Dan in action. I mean, Dan was following up with somebody about a problem internally about. I think it was inviting a guest over to people's rooms. So that's the idea: is people don't congregate in rooms. People break that rule. And I watched Dan come in and say, "I'm reminding you that we have our neighborhood, or we have our review meeting to talk about. This is a policy at the Red Lion. We need to sit down and review it. Otherwise, you may not be able to stay here." That's how we manage that sort of stuff, and it's effective. So please, that is, I apologize that information didn't get spread earlier. I think some of it happened so fast that we missed what some of our normal steps are, and that's why I'm appreciative of a format like this, that we can kind of hopefully make up for some lost time.
Yeah,
well, it's been there for 3 months, and I would have higher expectations. Organization of your caliber, please communicate with the adjoining property owners.
Well, and I'm gonna deflect some of the blame that Noah is readily taking on that one. For the first 2 months, I asked King County, have you contacted and been in communication to open that line of communication? And so I'm gonna finger point at King County on that one without hesitation. That was a continual ask of the chamber, or by the chamber of the county. Have you communicated with the businesses? And we had assurances from Cali Knight that they had.
And if I can piggyback on that, Diane, it's just, we had a meeting with DESC in King County last Friday at the facility and walked through the facility. And to your point, Mr. Kepler, I mean, there's absolutely no question about what has happened over the last few months. Zero. It's atrocious. It's devastating to the businesses there, and it needs to be fixed. From a fire department standpoint, we don't get involved too much in businesses, even though having a thriving business community is critically important to us, providing life safety to the community. But we were able to finally start connecting some dots with the ESC and with King County to make life safety issue progress. And I would just offer that based on what I've seen, that with good communication, DESC and King County can, you know, if we were in a nosedive, maybe we've hit the lowest end of it, but I do believe that they have a desire to not impact your businesses. I honestly, what I've seen in their concern for life safety, and I would not be in support of them if they took action that wasn't in support of creating a thriving business community to support the fire authority. But I think we've hit a low, and to Noah's point is like, we've got to get the contact information out there so that when we see these things happening in Renton Village, and they no doubt have and will continue to, that we've got a straight line to remedy that we can actually plot like the reduction in occurrences there. So that's my hope. But same thing as I'm not defending DESC or King County. And in fact, I want to land harder on the fact that our business community is hurting from this. I want to shed a little bit of hope on the fact that with clearing up communication, we've seen it in the fire department, and that maybe with the business community and with the chamber, and that we can draw a straighter line to getting remedies to some of the issues that we're seeing.
Noah, question for you. When you said people have been barred from the program, how many people have been barred from the program, and how many people have violated the good neighbor policy that you then work with to stay at the shelter, recognizing that you certainly don't want to, barring people would be the last choice?
I can tell you the number of bars. When I last looked, it was under 10. I think it was 8 since we opened in April, and that isn't necessarily for good neighbor issues. There are sometimes internal issues around property damage, for example, that's resulted in somebody being asked to go. The ongoing conversations with people number, that would be harder for me to ballpark. I know, Dan, you may have a reaction to how many people we've had conversations with about the good neighbor agreement that haven't resulted in a bar.
Yeah, at this point, you know, I don't remember any because I'm a part of that. We talk to people about, you know, our internal, you know, just policies that we're mainly barring people for and then meeting for on either Tuesdays or Fridays. But our last bar yesterday happened as a result of a client that was just, you know, had more mental health issues. And was as a result of that behavior just didn't meet our expectations inside the hotel. And so, but that was, other than that, those have been most of our typical issues, but I haven't, in the last 30 days, I don't remember seeing anybody on on a Tuesday or a Friday for a request for review, which isn't a bar. That was due to a good neighbor. So if it's a good neighbor violation, the staff will deal with that immediately and quickly rise up to our level of interference because it's a very clear expectation.
Another resource we have for that we don't have actually typically is most of our program, well, all of our other programs until COVID don't use security guards. That was something that the county agreed to as part of the move. That's been an interesting relationship for us to navigate. It's a different sort of orientation than what we're used to when working with folks, but they're an extra set of eyes and ears that sometimes report stuff that they hear from people in the community. Like I know there was an instance of shoplifting at the gas station across the street that I was aware of in June, that they were the team that reported it to us. So we do have more external facing eyes than a lot of programs of ours that are there 24/7, which is useful too.
Now, question for you on that good neighbor policy. Yesterday, and Craig, how many incidents, you had mentioned how many incidents that shelter residents had had with the Renton Police Department. And I thought the number was more like 25 incidents that had been reported back as guests from the hotel that had been involved with the Renton Police Department.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you ask. Were you asking me? I heard somebody else's name. Dan, that was a question to me.
Right. You had
Yeah.
mentioned, I think it was yesterday or at maybe on a King County call, or I think it was yesterday, that there had been about 25 incidents with guests from the shelter with the Renton Police Department.
Yeah, so I have a relationship with Deputy Chief Keys and Commander Harden. Commander Harden and I speak often. It was weekly when we first moved in. It has decreased as the calls to 911 have decreased commensurately. But he gives me a report of people that he knows are affiliated with the Red Lion who have a police involvement in the community. So that includes the example about the Wajimaya incidents. That includes the anecdote I mentioned about the case at Walmart and early in May a while ago. That also includes cases of jaywalking and things that are, you know, potentially problematic, but don't rise to the level of service withdrawal and involve just kind of informal conversations with people. So it's a pretty, the list runs the gamut from serious events to just lower level things that deserve follow-up, but don't rise to the level of service withdrawal.
So, and I'm glad you clarified that, because the eight individuals barred is certainly different than the 25 individuals that have had police contact. What type of, since we're falling back upon that good neighbor policy regularly, that there's a good neighbor policy, if they violate it, they'll be maybe transferred to another shelter in Seattle. That to me, that the question would arise, what good is the good neighbor policy if it's not being enforced all of the time? Or what are the items that the good neighbor policy is consisting of?
We can share it with you. I'd be happy to share that document. I mean, we've shared it with Callie several times. Actually, and so, you know, I think that was one of the format, or one of the venues where we tried to do some of this collaboration. And I don't know if that was necessarily going to get all that information out. I'm happy to share with you. Dan, you might remember the specific examples. Yeah, I mean, put a fine point on it. Oh, yeah, go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, so one of the things clearly that would be a lower level violation that we wouldn't ask the client to leave for is jaywalking. And so those are ones where it's like, you know, you look at that, you know, the size of the problem, the size of the reaction, and then you have to kind of weigh that with the client's level of functioning. And is this something that we enforce, you know, in all neighborhoods at all times? And the consistency. So, you know, everything kind of goes to the macro, you know, the client's level of functioning, you know, was this a volitional act, you know, and based on the information that we have on that particular individual. Because we do serve the most vulnerable clients, it is something that we have to consider all bases, because a person that could look normal in presentation, we could know and have, you know, a long history with this individual and understand something that the person, you know, the day-to-day person wouldn't understand, just, you know, in initial contact. So jaywalking would be a clear example of something we wouldn't remove. But if someone was continually loitering in front of a business, you know, and was causing issues, then that would be something that we would deal with, you know, pretty quickly. And you would see a fast result. So, you know, I hope that helps kind of give you a scale on kind of, you know, how to kind of look at each individual situation.
Yeah, well said, Dan. I think, and just to be really clear, I am by no means painting a picture, and I don't want people to take away from this that we have a good neighbor, a set of expectations, and, you know, there's certainly one-off examples of things that are just not acceptable. You wouldn't even need a good neighbor policy to say, like, this person, that it's something that we don't want in our community to tolerate or try to work through. There are other examples of things. These are our expectations. And if somebody doesn't live up to them, we use that as a thing to point to say, we need you to get here and follow these expectations, and we're going to follow up with you. We're going to give you some direction. We're going to issue some consequences. We're going to provide some coaching, some feedback so you can get there. But our goal is still at the end of the day to provide shelter to as many people safely as we can, of the 235 that can stay there. So, you know, I definitely don't want people to think if we have a good neighbor policy, if someone breaks it for something that is one off, even two off, if it's low level, our first response is going to be to withdraw services. Because fundamentally that undermines the very point of us being there, which is to avoid the spread of COVID. So I think I just want to be clear. I'm not trying to paint a picture that makes it look like that is an overly rigid tool, but it is a tool that we hold everyone accountable to. Accountable just doesn't mean we automatically kick you out of the program.
So Noah, recognizing that the impact to our businesses is real, and whether it be actual criminal violations or something that is elevated to the level that someone can be barred from your program, the impact's real. In light of the emergency, 235 people were transferred into Renton from across the region, essentially. Which originally, it sounds like you had about 508 beds in 5 different programs. So we now have essentially 46% of the shelter populations that used to be spread amongst 5 programs here in our backyard. And trying to be good neighbors, but recognizing that each one of those shelters had impacts in the surrounding communities that were magnificent. And whether it be attributed to the fact that it was congregate shelter that agitated the guests, or it could be substance abuse, mental health, or we're just all sick and tired of COVID and don't behave as kindly as we can. How can we be more proactive in reducing this impact upon these businesses that are already facing challenges that are magnificent from COVID? They're trying to sustain, they have expenses in training staff, in complying themselves with new COVID requirements. Then they have the additional expenses of additional security and measures that are directly attributed to guests of the shelter in some form or fashion, whether it be magnified by other individuals in that area. How can we be as proactive as possible to reduce that impact or negate that impact upon the businesses and community?
Yeah, thanks, Dan. I mean, I would say, just a point of clarification, we moved the big shelter that we had downtown, that population to the Renton Red Line. That's not answering your point, but just, we didn't siphon off from 500 and then concentrate into one program. It's actually the same size program that we moved to Renton, just for a point of clarification. And one thing that is, I think, just for the group to know, and it's something that we personally are proud of and highlighting about the impact, that we are seeing a dramatic reduction in the utilization of 911 from downtown Seattle to Renton. Admittedly, that is more calls than the Renton Red Line got before we moved there. I am not in the least bit deluding myself to think that there's not been an increase in an impact, and that's what Chief Marshal and the Renton Police Department and I are talking about and trying to manage. And we've seen a consistent decrease actually every month since we've been there in those calls. And even before that decrease, it's actually a 6-fold reduction in 911 calls from when we were in Seattle to where we are in Renton. I'm not minimizing the impact on Renton itself, but we do want to point out that we are seeing a pretty dramatic reduction in the level of crisis services needed. To answer your question about the impact to neighbors, where we're located in downtown Seattle is a pretty difficult area. Many of you probably know 3rd and James in downtown Seattle. It's across from the King County Courthouse. It's where services for people living in poverty have been concentrated for decades. It's the original Skid Row, in fact. Actually, that's where that term got its name. That's Gessler Avenue. And there in that neighborhood are many businesses that are been long-standing neighbors on our block. that do seemingly quite well. And I think part of that is based on having conversations like this on a regular basis, where we get to know each other, we solve issues in real time, and we're able to address simmering issues before they reach a point where we don't feel like we have a solution to solve them, has worked really well for us for the 40 years we've been there. And I know there's no plans to be in the Red Lion for 40 years, but that doesn't mean we can't have this regular dialogue to solve issues as they come up, which I think is clearly one of the missteps to where we are right now, is that this sort of dialogue didn't happen earlier in the process. Ashley, I see Ashley's got her hand up.
Thank you.
I don't want to jump in, but I thank you for being here again, Noah, and thanks everyone who's here today. I was at the meeting yesterday. I live downtown Renton in North Renton, so a neighbor to the DeIntensification Facility. Yesterday I asked you about how members of the Renton community can get involved with volunteering. If we know people, it's a lot easier to call your friend out or someone you know, say, hey, what are you doing over there? It also gives an opportunity for our community to welcome in some faces that, you know, might be having some stability, and it might give a sense of community and belonging, I guess. And so yesterday after the meeting, I kind of was thinking about it, and I'm wondering, I know with COVID, which is why you're at the Red Lion, it's difficult right now to have people come in and out and have volunteers be at the de-intensification facility, but is there an opportunity for any of the residents at the Red Lion to volunteer in the community? I know that I volunteer in this community, and it gives me a sense of ownership and a sense of pride of Renton, and it makes me want to contribute, and it builds my esteem to give back to others. And so I think it could be super beneficial to have some of the residents even help out or volunteer if there is a possibility to, just to not only build that esteem, but also to build the connection in the community. If that makes some sense, so that it's not just us volunteering with you guys, but you guys also coming into the community too. I don't know if that's an opportunity, but is that something that you guys would be open to?
I would love to promote something like that. Actually, Diane and I talked about that exact idea a week or so ago. There was some interest from some people, some local stakeholders, about offering volunteer opportunities. I would love to promote that and advertise that. I think just to reiterate who we're looking to serve, there are a lot of people in that program who aren't quite in a place to maybe be doing that kind of work. They very well may want to, but may not be able to follow through with that. And then there are plenty of people who would very likely jump at the chance. So I can tell you our team has been pretty busy trying to get the program up and running, and we would have probably had a better chance to identify some of those resources, but where those might be opportunities for people. But if anyone has ideas of opportunities for volunteering, we'd be happy to promote that sort of stuff for people. We have seen more engagement in the broader community from people staying at the Red Lion than I think I would have ever guessed, and it certainly trumps whatever we saw in downtown Seattle and the congregate shelter. And we've had people get jobs. The anecdote about the jogging group comes to mind every single time. We've had people do all sorts of things that are more kind of traditional activities of daily living, meaningful recovery type work in that setting in a short period of time than I would have ever guessed. So I bet that offer would be taken up upon. So please, my email oh, sorry. I was saying my email is going to be shared in the chat. I've shared it, and that was probably one of the missteps, is that's been the point of contact for concerns this whole time, shared by the county. And so maybe that's just not as accessible as we need. But for any ideas, I'm often want to be receptive to any sort of kind of programmatic ideas that people may have, or any concerns people have. So feel free to reach out to me with any of that, and I'll make sure we promote it.
Awesome. I know the Renton Lions Club, they do a highway cleanup at that cloverleaf that's literally right next to the Red Lion. So it's just a great, it's right there. They don't have to travel, or it's just right there. And the Renton Lions Club, I'm a member as well. They provide cleanup tools. They provide the vests. So you can come empty-handed and leave feeling full, like you've given back. And I I was stewing on it last night, and I think it would be a great way that we can continue. If we're going to be neighbors, let's be neighbors. So thank you so much for answering my questions, Noah, and I appreciate you taking the time to join us and continue this dialogue. So thank you so much.
Of course. Thank you, Ashley.
I see Angie has her hand up. Angie.
I'm unmuting there. I'm so sorry. It was dashing to and fro on my screen here. By the way, very lovely job, ladies on Renton Live this evening. I know you had to dash from one place to another as well. Thank you so much. And I need to be clear here that I am here as a citizen and neighbor of Renton and not in my capacity as a council member. I'm starting with that statement to start. I just had, I think that is a wonderful idea to have people working together as neighbors in volunteer efforts. I think that that's also how people get to know each other as people, is, you know, walking side by side and doing those kinds of activities. So I think that's a great idea. I do have a question about some of the numbers that have been quoted around the number of incidents, because as I understand it, what we're looking at is incident rates that were happening pre-COVID in a fully populated area with full businesses versus the numbers that would be looked at here now in a post-COVID universe where we're having, you know, a number of businesses in that area that aren't even open. And so I wonder if it's fair to make an apples to apples comparison around some of those numbers, given the fact that the conditions have changed so much. And then I also just had a question, and this is relating entirely, you know, different sort of, so if you were to say 6 months from now, the thing that you would most want to have happen, you know, like what do you see as that thing 6 months from now that you would like to say? Is it stay in this hotel? Is it go to a different hotel? Is it, I mean, understanding that there's a lot of different things that can be happening with this disease. What is it that you would see as like the very best end game you can find, or the very best thing you could say, this is what we would really like to see happening 6 months from now?
That's a great question. Well, I'll start with the easiest answer there is to that, and that the solution to homelessness is housing. So if we housed everybody, I could say we solved it. So that's what I would actually like to see in 6 months. Now the answer, based on that, what we know that we probably won't have that number of units available. The vast majority of DSC clientele need permanent supportive housing, which is the model I talked about at the beginning of this conversation. And we've worked with different groups, stakeholders to assess. We're about 6,500 units short, so I can't help but make that plug. So that's what I'd like to see. If that's not an option, I have learned, and Dan and Ron and others in this field have just been blown away by the power of people being able to shelter in non-traditional shelter environments where they have some of their own private space. Before the pandemic, we were doing a lot of work saying we need to break up these congregate shelters where we cram in as many people as we can, because a night out on the street is potentially fatal. Let's not mince words. People die out there. It's traumatic out on the streets. Homeless shelters are traumatic too, but they provide survival services in a way that the streets don't. So let's get as many people in as we can. We've changed our mind on that. It's the philosophy. We just see it's harder for people to stabilize. Some of the crisis needs increase in those dynamics. So we've decided before this, we want to make a shift away from large congregate shelters. Since the pandemic and seeing what has happened in these de-intensification facilities that obviously the Red Line, but then CCS and Sophia's Way and a few others have done similar work. We've seen people's quality of life stabilize and improve so dramatically, so fast. Our reliance on 911 decreased so much that we don't want to go back to congregate shelters. That doesn't mean I want to say I want to stay in the Renton Red Line. That's really not my end game. My end game is to get away from going back to big open shelter dorms, because it's really just not good for anybody. It's flatly, totally unacceptable in the middle of a pandemic, because not only is it risky for the people themselves living in that facility, but we're, only as strong as the weakest links among us. And if we have people who don't have a place to shelter in place, or stay at home and follow a stay-at-home order, we are all more likely to potentially contract COVID, as everyone just is that interconnected. So as it relates to the pandemic, I don't think we can go back, but as it relates to how we want to operate shelter, recognizing that we probably won't have enough housing for a long time and shelter will remain a resource we still need to scale, I don't want to do it in the old way. To be clear, that doesn't mean it has to be the Renton Red Line at all. And DSC's position is we want to do something where people have their own private space wherever we can find it.
Fair answer. Thank you. Appreciate that very much. Just if you know anything about, you probably don't know anything about me and my background. I have spent 23 years working in the library system, and so I am very familiar with the impacts that you're describing. Just working with folks every single day until the pandemic. So I'm familiar with what it is that you're saying. Just understanding that, though, what do you see as being a path to that reality, given some of the financial constrictions that are going to be happening here in the King County budget? Do you have some ideas of where some of that funding might come so that that vision can be realized?
Yeah, I mean, I love it when nonprofit leaders get to figure out where we get revenue. It might be a little outside of my scope, but I've got a couple ideas. Slightly joking aside, although I do, is it's actually cheaper to do this. Admittedly, the upfront capital to find a place that could be converted is not included, and that's not something to scoff at. The actual per night cost of sheltering people this way is in fact cheaper than sheltering people the old way, because no matter what, we're not going to go back to violating public health social distancing guidelines in shelters. And so the economy of scale you got by sheltering 238 people in a big open room that's off the table no matter what. So that same old program can serve far fewer people. And a lot of those costs are hard costs that you really can't find a way to shave off by serving fewer people. So the per night bed count, or the per night cost of running the Red Line, is about 30% cheaper than it is running our old shelter, when you factor in that we can't cram people next to each other anymore out of a risk of COVID. So that's not a cop-out to your answer, but it is a little surprising factoid that I think is important for us to promote here.
I just wanted to share a little bit of my perspective, because I have some of the same concerns that Craig had mentioned earlier, but from a very different perspective, in that, and just a little bit of background from me, I used to work for Path with Art down in Pioneer Square. I don't know if you're familiar with them. I was a grant writer.
I'm very familiar.
Yep. And so, I come at this from a place of understanding and empathy and, seeing our shared humanity and all of that. But when I bought the house, so I'm a resident, so I come to this meeting as a neighbor, but not coming from a place of like property ownership with like needing money or tenants or things like that, but have literally experienced some of the things that Craig described in our backyard, literally. So I just, having spent the last 13 years here, I think I could probably say that when we first moved into our neighborhood where we are now, it was almost worse in terms of some of the stuff that we would see and have to report to try to clean things up. And we've participated in our neighborhood cleanups and tree plantings and doing public art and doing all those types of things where we're literally like 5 blocks from the Red Lion on Smithers between 3rd and 4th. And I feel like after doing all that, things have really kind of come full circle for us in the things that we're seeing, and the uptick in that activity is in direct correlation with the emergency placement. I agree that, if you're providing a bed for someone, that they probably shouldn't be the ones out on the streets, but, they're new faces for us. And so I think about it from, like I said, I did grant writing for Path with Art. I think about funders. You've explained a lot of the great things about it. But I also, and I'm sure those are the things that are going to be reported, but also from my perspective, at what expense to, I don't like I can't go home at the end of the day, you know, after cleaning up human feces off my property. Like, it is my home. So there's a little bit of that, you know, of why I'm here participating, just kind of sharing that perspective a little bit, being right in the core here.
Well,
I don't expect a solution right now. I mean,
yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that, and thanks for your great work with Path with Art. I used to operate manage one of our housing programs where several tenants actually worked with your Path for Art program and did all sorts of cool work. So I'm super familiar with that program. So without answering and rehashing some of the stuff we talked about earlier, and wanting to take those concerns seriously, genuinely seriously, I really say that contacting us if you see something and you think it is attributed to people who are staying there, we are responsive to that. That's a genuine offer. It's not kind of the cop-out that you would expect me to say. We will respond to those concerns related to people staying in our facility, or even people who have friends who they may have in the community. We'll have those sorts of conversations. We take that seriously with people because we recognize we need to have strong neighbors, and we have, we want the best for the people that stay in our programs, and we consider how people comport themselves outside of where they stay contributing to that enormously. And so that we really genuinely take that seriously. So the number we shared, the emails that I know Diane has shared, those are available to everybody with questions and concerns about specific events that our team will definitely follow up on.
Thanks, Noah. And I think Sybil brings up a really good point, is that the neighborhoods downtown, North Renton, South Renton, they really did a lot of work at cleaning up the neighborhoods. And so to be faced with those challenges again, and Sybil says it kind of comes full circle, is it's disheartening for the work that was put in. And so please understand that some of the sensitivity to the situation is not a NIMBY approach as much as it is. We worked so hard to kind of to improve those challenges from before. So we're over the hour mark, and I appreciate everybody sticking around and having the conversation. Ashley, I see your hand up.
I have one more quick question, and it's kind of a follow-up to what Angela was talking about earlier. Again, if we're going to be neighbors, let's be neighbors. What can we do as your neighbors to help that vision come to fruition? Like, what can we do? Are there people that we can be reaching out to? Like, what can we do to make it so that the residents at the Red Lion have success, and that you guys are able to continue that success and have, if the vision could come true, what are steps that we can take as a community to help that happen?
Yeah, thanks, Ashley. I mean, I appreciate that question. I mean, I would say the two things that come to mind most, I would say, is if you're talking with friends and neighbors and colleagues, making it known that I guess, actions are louder than words, but we really want to walk the talk around being receptive and responsive to things in the neighborhood. So let them know that they can expect that from DESC. And then in terms of people that they may encounter that people may think are staying at the Red Lion or know are staying at the Red Lion, treating them the same way we treat any other neighbor, and saying hello from, our appropriate 6 feet of distance, and truly just getting to know people. I mean, I've heard some stories that have been really inspiring from Red Lion guests about people they've met in the community and opportunities people have given them in the community. I've also heard some really disheartening stories about one story that I think, Dan, you actually shared with me, about a gentleman who was at a store where the person who was checking at the checkout line was talking about what a horrible impact all the people across the street have had, and how what they've done to their community, and just that they're dangerous. And he listened to her for a while, only to then tell her, in fact, he's staying there and he's so grateful for that opportunity. So just humanizing the folks, which is hard to do with people you don't know, forget about people you don't know who may have some stigma attached, and just not being shy to say hello and get to know one another, I think goes a world of makes a world of difference.
Well, thank you so much for answering that question. And if you think of, I hope that this dialogue continues within the community and within the neighborhood. And if you think of other ways that we can help support that vision, like I said yesterday, there's people in this community that have been homeless my entire life, and I've grown up alongside them, seeing them live on the streets. And so those have become like regulars in my life. But you guys are all new. And so I hope that we can continue this conversation so that some of those visions of, you know, the dream can become a reality, and maybe we can make an impact, help you guys make an impact on having these residents hit success. So thank you so much, Noah.
Yeah, you're welcome. And I think I would just quickly add too, I can't tell you how many times people have, who are staying in the program, have expressed just profound gratitude for the opportunity they have to be there. And so being a good neighbor and getting to know the neighbors really, truly is the overwhelmingly vast majority of people there, even if they don't have the skills to articulate that. The gratitude amongst people staying in the program exceeds the gratitude that we have for being allowed to be there. And I can promise you that. So you know that people appreciate their neighbors in Renton.
Super. Well, Noah and I will put together a cadence. We discussed a possible 2-week cadence for continuing meetings and dialogue like this. In the meantime, I've put that information out for Noah's contact information, as well as the 24/7 number there at the Red Lion, and he has indicated please utilize it. If you have questions, comments, concerns, reach out. I'm sure they will be receptive to the same, and we will let everybody know when that next meeting is. Then we will, unless anybody has anything else that's pressing, that will certainly don't want someone to walk away feeling as though they haven't said something they need to. Okay, in that instance, I will thank everybody for coming. Noah, thank you very much. We appreciate your willingness to have conversations, and we do appreciate the work that you're doing. It is much needed, and I'm sure as we progress through COVID, will become more so. And so, thank you for your willingness to be a collaborative partner to try to lessen the impact while you're bringing success to those that you serve.
Thank you so much. Thanks for being neighborly. We appreciate it, and we'll keep this conversation going.
Okay. Thanks, guys. Have a good night.
Bye-bye.